Hey guys, this is video 1 in the Harmony series, where in this series of videos, we're going to look at how chords are used to create chord progressions, how you arrange chords in nice, logical, and compelling ways that create chord progressions that are really the foundation of songs. Now, this is really where things get cool as a songwriter. Once you know how chord progressions work and how to string different chords in different ways, you can start to create some really cool stuff, some really nice art. Now, if you're like me, and like most guitarists, most musicians who start out, you first start by playing some chords, strumming some chords. You might get some chord diagrams and see where to place your fingers on the different frets to create chords, and that's nice. But then you might hit a roadblock where you're like, what do I do from there? I know how to play chords, but I don't know how to arrange those chords in a pleasing way that makes for a nice song. And when you hear songs on the radio or online, listening to different musicians who are professional songwriters, they definitely have this down. They know how to put chords together in a way that is compelling and awesome. But how do you do it? In this series, we're going to answer that question, and you're really going to get at the underlying music theory that's at play here, all of the patterns that inform all of this. Now, to really understand chord progressions, you need to know how chords work. And in this video series, I explain exactly how chords work in a visual way using color to show how these patterns are built. And that when you get right down to it, chords are just logical formations of notes and intervals that stem from the major scale in a given key. Like in the key of C, for example, where you can basically build a chord starting on each scale degree in this scale and then combining every other note to create 7 chords or 7 triads that look like this. And in each triad, the intervals that separate the notes are called tertian intervals. Tertian meaning of a third, so major thirds and minor thirds. And based on these patterns of tertian intervals, a variety of chord types are constructed in a key, where you get 3 major chords, or chords 1, 4, and 5, that sound especially bright and strong and happy, and then 3 minor chords, or chords 2, 3, and 6, that sound relatively weak and melancholy or sad. And then what's called a diminished chord, or the 7, that sounds especially weak, like this. When you play all of these chords in order, it basically sounds like the major scale on steroids. And within this group of chords, like I say, there are 3 types of harmonies: the happy major chords, the sad minor chords, and the really sad diminished chord, that together form what you could call a kind of palette of emotions. Different triads that, based on their intervals, the intervals that construct them, create a range of audible feelings or emotion. Now, when you can actually see these patterns, it's pretty insightful, right? Because you're not just blindly relying on your ears to hear these otherwise invisible sequences and patterns that can be really kind of difficult to understand if you can't see them, if you can't picture them in your head or with your actual 2 eyes. When you can see these patterns, it's really cool. And in this table format, you can really start to understand the intervals and sequences at play to construct chords. And that's great. Like I say, it's very insightful. But it's still not quite enough to know, then what do I do with these chords? I say it's like an emotional palette, like a palette of emotions. But just like a painter's palette, it's one thing to have the paint arranged like this so that it's easily accessible and for you to draw from to create art. But the act of actually creating art, of using these paints to produce a picture, requires some additional knowledge. Or to use a metaphor from science, the periodic table of the elements is a common and really useful way to understand all of the different ingredients that make up the world around us. By organizing all of the elements in this way, scientists have a kind of list of ingredients used in nature to create different objects. But this periodic table itself is just that. It's a list of ingredients. It's not the finished product. Likewise, in music, this periodic table of chords, if you will, or this painter's palette of emotions, isn't quite enough to make music. So in this series, we're going to take it to the next level by seeing how to use these chords, how to use these basic building blocks to create chord progressions. Logical, compelling, awesome chord progressions that make really cool songs. Now, in each video, you're gonna gain more and more insight, taking it to the next level and the next level and the next level. In this first video, we're gonna look at 3 basic tricks that musicians often use to start using chords to create chord progressions. And the first one is to simply use chords, the chords in a key, as an emotional painter's palette. So in the key of C, for example, we can use the different kinds of chords there are, major, minor, and diminished, and the kind of emotional qualities that they have to create chord progressions with chords that sound good together. So, for example, we can play a happy chord progression using just the major chords. So C, and then F, which is the 4 chord, and then 5, G. So again, that's C, the major chord 1, F, major chord 4, and 5, G, major chord 5. And you'll actually hear that a lot of songs, and by that I mean a lot of songs, use these 3 chords because they have a really happy quality. Or we can dip into the darker, more melancholy sounds of the key, those chords that are minor and also diminished. We can throw that in here. So let's say instead of the major chords, we play a minor 2, D minor, E minor, which is the minor 3, and the A minor, which is the 6, and throw in a B diminished chord. So this chord progression almost brings a tear to the eye, right? Because all of the chords are melancholy, or kind of sad sounding and weak because of those intervals that make up those chords, the minor thirds, the minor tertian intervals that make them sound more sad. Or we can mix it up by throwing in some major chords and some minor chords to create more emotional complexity, some more nuance where we're not just, all happy all the time or all sad all the time, but we are humans and we can create music that matches and mirrors our complexity, our emotional complexity as people. So for example, we could play the 1 chord, which is major, and then the minor 3, minor 2, so a little sadness going on here, and then back to the happy 5, happy C, sad 3, sad 2, so we went from a happy 4 to a happy 5, and then back to a happy C, dipping into the sadness of a minor chord, continuing that melancholia of the minor 2 to a major 4, major 5, 1. So that's one way to do it, how to create a chord progression, is to take the different types of chords in a key, whether they're major, minor, or diminished, and arrange them in a way where they sound either happy or sad, depending on the kind of mood you want to evoke in the listener. Now, one consideration with that approach, though, is that yes, you have a chord progression and the chords flow nicely between each other, but then how do you flesh out a song from there? How do you make a melody that fits with that chord progression? You definitely can, and some songwriters do it that way, but a much more common approach is to flip it. So you start with the melody and then flesh out the song with a chord progression. Now, in this video, I explain, in essence, how that's done. And the secret is this. Because each triad, because each chord in a key is based on its own respective scale degree in the major scale, each chord basically functions like its respective scale degree. And since any melody is really just a rearrangement of the underlying scale within a key, when you create a melody, moving from one note to the next in sequence, the chords you play to support that melody basically follow the same pattern. So by starting with the melody, this informs the order of chords you play in a progression, because the order of chords will follow that of the melody. So a perfect example that ties all of this together is a little number known as Ode to Joy by Ludwig van Beethoven. He was a German composer back in the day. When did he live? I'm looking at Wikipedia right now. He was born in 1820. So we're going back a little ways, but this is a perfect example. One, because it's called Ode to Joy, and you'll see why, because as it so happens, the chords that are used to support the melody almost all happen to be the major 1 chord in the key of C, C, the 4 chord, the major chord, or F major in the key of C, and then the 5 chord, the major 5 chord, which is the G chord in the key of C. So all of these chords evoke that happiness, hence the name Ode to Joy. And what's really cool is our friend Ludwig started with the major scale as a starting point to create the melody. So Beethoven started with the C major scale. And as Beethoven was noodling around on his instrument, he took the major scale, rearranged the notes, and starting on different notes, he came up with Ode to Joy, which is a melody you've definitely heard before. It's very famous. So we can just picture Beethoven played that melody and he was like, damn, that's good. I need to flesh that out with some chords, and I think I know just the chords to do it, because while this melody stemmed from the major scale, the chords are going to basically mirror this pattern, and they're also going to come from the key of C, which in turn come from the major scale as well. And the joyful chords that support this melody go like this. So Beethoven used trick number 2, which was to start with the melody that's based on the major scale, and then have chords that follow that melody. The melody is the starting point, and the chords follow it. And because the melody was very upbeat and hit a lot of intervals 1, 4, and 5, the chord progression followed suit, and the chords that really dominate that are the 1, 4, and 5 chords, which happen to be happy, and those chords lead to a song title like Ode to Joy, joyful, happy. Now, the third trick that we're going to do is kind of a culmination of all of these things, and we're going to use the song Island in the Sun by Weezer, which is a brilliant, wonderful song, and it's deceptively simple. Now, rather than being in the key of C, this song is in the key of G. But because all keys are symmetrical in music, the same basic patterns and principles apply, which we can see with color. So in the key of G, the G major scale is the foundation for the 7 triads that are built from that scale. Chords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what Weezer did in this song is a couple of things. Like Beethoven, they also based the melody of this tune on the major scale. So in the key of G, the G major scale is... And from this scale, the melody bounces around as a rearrangement of these notes. It's a really pretty melody that inherently sounds good because it follows the major scale pattern almost exactly in some spots. And the major scale sounds good because it in turn is a rearrangement of the circle of fifths, as I explain in this video, that shows that the major scale is really just a subset of the chromatic scale, the 12 basic notes of music. And because the chromatic scale itself is a rearrangement of the circle of fifths, a fundamental pattern in music theory that explains how all of the notes and keys and chords relate to each other, when you take a subset of the circle of fifths and in turn rotate that back into the chromatic scale, you have the major scale. So the chromatic scale, the major scale, and the circle of fifths are really just permutations of each other. They're different reincarnations of the same essential pattern. And that's why music is so cool, because it's really very fractal in that all of the patterns we play are interconnected and based on each other. They're kind of self-referential and cyclical in this way. So anyway, looking at the G major scale and then rotating this pattern into a circle of fifths arrangement, we can get some special insight into the chords that are used in Weezer's song Island of the Sun. And that is that the chord progression in this song basically flows through a circle of fifths sequence from the minor sixth, E minor, to the minor second, A minor, to the 5, D, to the 1, the tonic chord, G major. And by repeating this pattern again and again, the song's very repetitive, the music essentially combines a circle of fifths sequence, this chord progression, with a melody that closely follows the major scale. And the result is this. So the song really is brilliant, combining elements of the major scale with the melody, with the circle of fifths sequence of chords 6, 2, 5, 1 repeated again and again. And then you have that emotional element with the lyrics talking about playing and having fun and not feeling bad anymore, which is definitely influenced by the chords, the mix of major and minor chords that have both happy and sad feelings. And all of it combines into this beautiful, beautiful blend of elements, which is Island in the Sun. So those are three tricks that we looked at here in this video, basically using the chords and a key as an emotional palette from which to draw, or using the melody as the guide to then flesh out the melody with chords that mirror those notes in that sequence, or then also using other patterns like the circle of fifths and some of the intervals at play in music theory to come up with a great chord progression. And in the next video, we're going to take it to the next level by really looking at the intervals that inform chords and how they can be arranged in a sequence that really makes sense, really makes sense beyond just the circle of fifths sequence and the last example we looked at here, but a special link between chords that really can create and help you create all sorts of progressions. That's in the next video, so thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.